Whatever happened to? From King George. What was his problem? Always her husband's closest friend and advisor, Abigail Adams continued offering her political opinions while John Adams served as vice president and then president of the United States. Some powerful men didn't appreciate Abigail's open participation in politics, but that never stopped her. When she neared death in 1818, John Adams described Abigail this way: "The whole of her life has been filled up doing good." John Adams served as American minister to Great Britain after the Revolution, actually meeting his old enemy, King George III. It was polite. It was a short, polite meeting. Following one term as president, Adams ran for re-election in 1800 and was beaten by Thomas Jefferson in America's first truly nasty presidential campaign. Adams retired to his farm in Massachusetts, later calling these years at home with Abigail the happiest of my life. He died at age 90 on July 4th, 1826. After dedicating his entire life to the struggle for American independence, Samuel Adams returned to Boston and ran for the House of Representatives in the country's first congressional election. He lost to a 31-year-old. Still not ready to leave politics and too poor to retire, Adams turned to state government. He was elected governor of Massachusetts at the age of 71. The $2,500 salary was by far the highest he had ever earned. When American forces prepared to attack the British in Canada in late 1775, Ethan Allen was sent ahead to enlist Canadian volunteers. Instead, for some reason, he tried to capture the city of Montreal by himself. Sent to Britain in chains, Allen was later freed in a prison of war exchange. He settled in his beloved Vermont, where he died in 1789. After risking his life as a spy during the Revolution, James Armistead returned to the plantation of his owner. He remained enslaved until his former commander, Marquis de Lafayette, petitioned the Virginia Assembly to grant his freedom, which it did in 1787. 40 years later, when Lafayette was visiting the United States, the two friends met on the street in Richmond, Virginia, and they hugged. As a brand new British general, Benedict Arnold led several attacks on American towns, even raiding and burning New London, Connecticut, just a few miles from his boyhood town. After the war, Arnold moved restlessly between Canada, the Caribbean, and Britain, dying quietly in London at the age of 60. Poor General Arnold has departed this world without notice, reported the London Post. Peggy Arnold, with her husband till the end, died 3 years later at age 44. Gentleman Johnny Burgoyne retired from the British Army in 1784, turning instead to his true passions, playwriting and fine London living. He wrote several plays, including the comedy The Heiress, which was a smash hit in 1786. He died 6 years later at age 70. Back in Britain, Charles Cornwallis joined the massive public debate about who was to blame for Yorktown. His choice? Fellow General Henry Clinton. Cornwallis later went on to serve successfully as military governor of British colonies in India and Ireland. He'd be sorry to see that he is sometimes still referred to as the man who lost America. Much to the regret of the women of Paris, Benjamin Franklin sailed back to America in 1785. Welcomed home as a hero in Philadelphia, he was soon asked to represent Philadelphia at the Constitutional Convention. He is 82 years old, said a fellow delegate, and possesses an activity of mind equal to a youth of 25. After convincing many reluctant leaders to sign the completed Constitution, Franklin still wasn't done. He spent his final years serving as president of the Pennsylvania Society for Promoting the Abolition of Slavery. Shortly after the Revolution, King George III, age 50, began to suffer from a mysterious illness that doctors now believe to have been porphyria. He experienced intense stomach pain, rashes, confusion, and episodes of what witnesses described as madness, for instance. One night at dinner, he attempted to smash the Prince of Wales' head against the wall. In spite of the work of ignorant doctors, the king's health improved. He continued to suffer similar attacks until his death in 1820 at age 81. George Washington's young aide, Alexander Hamilton, went on to become one of the main architects of the new American government and economy. Some historians say he was the most brilliant of all the founders, which is really saying something. But the way he died was not smart. Caught up in a bitter feud with Vice President Aaron Burr, he agreed to duel Burr with pistols. Hamilton was shot and killed in 1804 at the age of 47. John Hancock remained the most popular politician in Massachusetts throughout his entire life, serving 9 terms as governor. As he grew older, painful attacks of gout swelled his joints and left him unable to walk. When Massachusetts was debating ratification of the Constitution, however, and it looked like state leaders might vote no, Hancock got involved. He wrapped his aching legs in blankets, had himself carried into the meeting house, and announced, "I give my assent to the Constitution." Massachusetts approved the Constitution in a very close vote. By the way, you'll recall that on the night of Paul Revere's famous ride, young Dorothy Quincy said of her fiancé, John Hancock, "At that time, I should have been very glad to have got rid of him." Dorothy and John were married in August 1775. They lived happily together until John's death in 1793. After serving in the Virginia legislature as a state governor, Patrick Henry retired from government in 1791. Heavily in debt, Henry revived his old legal practice and his reputation as the most exciting courtroom lawyer in the country. One reason he had to keep making money was that he continued fathering children into his 60s. In 1798, his second wife, Dorothea, gave birth to Henry's 17th child. Henry died the next year at age 63. After serving as the country's first state secretary, second vice president, and third president, Thomas Jefferson began a busy retirement at Monticello, his Virginia home. In addition to designing buildings and founding the University of Virginia, Jefferson made peace with his old political rival John Adams. Jefferson and Adams exchanged more than 150 letters discussing current events, political philosophy, and the hardships of growing old. Jefferson, like Adams, died on July 4th, 1826, exactly 50 years from the day their Declaration of Independence was approved. Before the Revolution, he ran a bookstore, but by the end of the war, Henry Knox was one of the country's top military experts. Knox served 10 years as the first Secretary of War before retiring with his wife, Lucy, to a mansion in Maine. Always known as great entertainers, Henry and Lucy immediately won their new neighbors by inviting more than 500 of them to a massive 4th of July festival. Marie John Paul Joseph Rogues Gilbert du Montier, also known as Marquis de Lafayette, returned to it as a hero welcome to France. He was an early leader of the French Revolution. Then, due to events much too complicated to explain here, he fled France and wound up spending 6 years in an Austrian prison. 30 years later, he made one last tour of the United States. He was greeted like a rock star. After leaving the Continental Army, Joseph Plum Martin spent a year teaching in New York, then settled in Maine. He married, had a large family, and at the age of 70 published a book called A Narrative of a Revolutionary Soldier, Some of the Adventures, Dangers, and Sufferings of Joseph Plum Martin. Martin's book gives us one of the best inside looks at life in the Continental Army. Thomas Paine continued writing and traveling and offending others with his opinions. After nearly being jailed in Britain and nearly getting beheaded in France during the French Revolution, Paine died penniless in New York City in 1809. His death went unnoticed except by a British admirer who secretly dug up Paine's bones and put them on a boat to Britain. No one knows what happened to them. Returning to private life after the war, Paul Revere ran a hardware store, made bells and cannons, and continued his work as a master silversmith. As always, he was ready to drop everything to protect his town. When it looked like the British were about to attack Boston during the War of 1812, Revere grabbed a shovel and a wheelbarrow and helped fortify the city. He was 80 years old. Deborah Sampson married a man named Benjamin Gannett and had 3 children. In addition to teaching school, she developed a traveling show in which she appeared on stage dressed as a Continental Army soldier and talked about her war experiences. When she died at the age of 67, Congress awarded her family a special pension for the relief of the heirs of Deborah Gannett, a soldier of the Revolution. George Washington's hopes for a quiet retirement at Mount Vernon were short-lived. First, he was sent to represent Virginia at the Constitutional Convention. Then he was chosen to be the first president of the United States. I greatly fear that my countrymen will expect too much from me, he confided in a friend. He served 2 terms as president, then he was asked to serve a 3rd term. He absolutely refused. George and Martha Washington finally moved back home in 1797, where, 2.5 years later, Washington developed a dangerous throat infection. With no idea how to cure this kind of illness, doctors bled him 4 times and smeared a medicine of dried beetles on his neck. Washington could tell it wasn't working. I feel myself going, he told the doctors. I thank you for your attentions, but I pray you to take no more trouble about me. Sitting with him as he died, Martha called out, I shall soon follow him. Martha died 3 years later and was buried beside George at Mount Vernon.